Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to our daily Hindu analysis. Now before we begin, why don't you support our initiatives by pressing that like button, share your comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And also remember, immediately after this session ends, please head to our official Telegram channel because as soon as the session gets over, we'll have a quiz on the topics that we are discussing today. It will help you revise these topics and prepare effectively for the upcoming prelims. So do subscribe to the Telegram channel also. So let's start today's analysis by first taking a look at the topics that we are going to cover in today's discussion. First, we have a very big development with regard to India's efforts to counter terrorism. India has got a Pakistani terrorist designated by the UNSC 1267 Sanctions Committee. So this is a big development and we need to understand this in detail. The Hindu even carries an editorial which is related to this development. So we shall cover both these articles together. Then we have an important column that helps us gain insight into the geopolitics of South Asia. We shall take a look at that. We have another column related to GST and the state of financial relations between the central government and the state governments. Then we'll go into history. We will evaluate the legacy of Subhash Chandra Bose, his contribution, the controversy surrounding him, and his popularity. So we shall take a detailed look at this as well. And we have few small articles lined up at the end. An article related to India-China relations as far as dam projects are concerned over the Brahmaputra, and also an article related to India-Russia defense relations regarding the production of AK-203 assault rifles in India. So these are the important topics that we have for today, and let's start with the first topic. For the first discussion, I'll be taking up two articles. From the front page, we have this article referring to the designation of a Lashkar terrorist who's based out of Pakistan by the name Abdul Rahman Maki. He has been listed as a global terrorist by the UNSC 1267 Sanctions Committee. And related to this, there is an important editorial explaining the role of China in protecting Pakistan with regard to Pakistan's sponsorship of terrorism against India. This allows us an opportunity to understand India's global diplomatic efforts to counter terrorism, particularly at the United Nations. It also helps us understand the role of Pakistan in sponsoring terrorism against India and how China creates problems over here in shielding and protecting Pakistan at the UN. So let's understand all these important points. But first, we need to begin with the basics. Let's understand what is the 1267 Sanctions Committee. See, the 1267 Sanctions Committee of the UN Security Council, it was established in the year 1999 through resolution number 1267. That's why it's called 1267 Sanctions Committee. It is named after the resolution number that was adopted by the United Nations. This resolution primarily provides for a set of sanctions against terrorists, those who are designated by the UN. It provides for the establishment of a sanctions committee which will designate global terrorists, and all the UN member states will be obliged, they'll be obligated to impose these set of sanctions against these globally designated terrorists. Initially, this committee was set up to target terror groups like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. That's why it was also known as the Taliban and Al-Qaeda Sanctions Committee. The 1267 Sanctions Committee is also referred to as Taliban and Al-Qaeda Sanctions Committee. This resolution has been amended and updated a couple of times in 2011 and 2015, mainly to account for the rise of Islamic State. Islamic State, or also known as Daesh or ISIL, Islamic State in the Levant region, which operates in Iraq and Syria, was also brought under the scope of this Sanctions Committee. So since then, this Sanctions Committee has helped in targeting terrorists belonging to Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and many other related groups which have connections with all these global terror outfits. India in particular has been using this platform over the last 14-15 years to target those terrorists who are based out of Pakistan. Many top terror leaders of groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and others have been targeted by India so that we could put diplomatic pressure on Pakistan and as well as on these terror outfits. So you can even take a small exercise over here. I want you to take up a small exercise and read about the Levant region. Since I mentioned that ISIS is also known as ISIL or Islamic State in the Levant, just as a practice for your maps, for your map reading skills, read about the Levant region. Identify where the Levant region is located and can you post in the comments below as to which countries are covered in this region called the Levant region. It could be very helpful for map-based questions in your prelims. Now coming back to the discussion, as I was saying, India has used the 1267 Sanctions Committee to target Pakistan-based terrorists. This is one of our diplomatic efforts to push Pakistan and force Pakistan to give up terrorism as a weapon. Is that clear? So this committee has 15 members. The composition of the committee is also very important for your prelims. Basically, all the 15 members of UNSC are members of this Sanctions Committee. It includes the 5 permanent members, the P5, and also includes the 10 non-permanent members of UN Security Council. So these 15 countries decide upon whether an individual can be designated as a global terrorist. The resolution for designating an individual as a global terrorist can be moved by any UN member state. This proposal can be brought up by any member country. Any country which is a member of the UN can forward a proposal and table a resolution at the Sanctions Committee by providing the backing evidence or substantiating evidence so that these terrorists can be globally designated by the UNSC. So based on the proposal and the evidence which is given by the country, these 15 members will decide whether this individual qualifies to be designated as a global terrorist. So this decision is made by consensus. That is, all the 15 members have to agree to this proposal. Even if one member, even if a non-permanent member votes against the proposal, then the individual cannot be designated as a global terrorist. So essentially, each country here, all the 15 countries which are part of the Sanctions Committee, enjoy a veto, because the decisions here are made by consensus. Now, what kind of sanctions will apply? Once a terrorist is designated by this Sanctions Committee, what are the sanctions that will apply? What are the obligations on the UN members? There are 3 types of sanctions that will apply. The first one is financial sanctions. Every UN member will have to freeze all the financial assets that are related to this terrorist. Whatever financial assets that are owned by the terrorist and his known accomplices, friends, families, they would all be listed under the proposal, and all these assets linked to the terrorist will be entirely frozen by all the UN member states. So this provides for a complete freeze on their financial assets. It limits the ability of the terrorist to arrange finances for terror operations. Second, UN members are obligated to restrict the movement of these terrorists. Basically, it provides for a travel ban. Once a terrorist is designated as a global terrorist, there will be a travel ban imposed on them by all the UN members. If they detect their presence, they'll be bound to arrest them and prevent them from moving to another country, from traveling from one place to another. This restricts the mobility of the terrorists. Again, this helps in impeding their ability to plan and organize terror attacks. And finally, all UN members have to work together to place an arms embargo. Basically, they have to ensure that they deny access to weapons to these terrorists. These designated terrorists, they should not get hold of any weapons, which will again immobilize them and it will prevent them from planning and organizing terror attacks. So these are the 3 types of sanctions that will apply once an individual is designated as a global terrorist by the 1267 Sanctions Committee. So all the facts that I have discussed can be very, very important from a prelims point of view. Now, let's go a little more into details and critically examine this development. Let's see what India is trying to achieve here. Let's see what Pakistan and China have done, and let's talk about the end result. See, this is one of India's coercive diplomacies against Pakistan. We have used United Nations over the years to counter terrorism. and we have stepped up our coercive diplomacy, that is our forceful diplomacy, to counter terrorism at these multilateral institutions. For example, in 1996, at the United Nations, India proposed a global convention to counter terrorism called the CCIT Convention, the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. This convention was proposed by India to mainly target state-sponsored terrorism. So it was indirectly aimed at Pakistan, which has been waging a covert war against India for many decades and has been using terrorism as a weapon against India, as a geopolitical weapon. So this convention proposed by India would focus on state-sponsored terrorism, and if it was adopted, every UN member would have to adopt a law, a national law, that will criminalize all forms of terrorism. It wouldn't distinguish between good terrorism and the so-called bad terrorism. It would target all forms of terrorism, and it would obligate all the UN members to collectively act against terrorism. So UN members would have been obligated to prevent safe havens for terror sanctuaries, to freeze all financial assets related to terror financing, to tackle money laundering and terror financing, to ensure that access to weapons are limited to these terrorists, and the law should also provide for strict punishments to ensure that terror groups are held accountable and justice is delivered in case of the violations that they commit. This was India's proposal, but unfortunately this initiative of India did not get enough support at the UN. Many countries which still use terrorism as a geopolitical weapon, they were opposed to it because it would lead to accountability, it would lead to questions against them. So many powers like US, then many West Asian countries, and Pakistan of course, they were all against the adoption of this convention. There were a few other countries which were concerned that such a law could lead to human rights violations because it would have stringent provisions, and on human rights grounds as well, there was opposition by few countries, especially from South America. So due to the lack of support at the UN, this convention proposed by India was never adopted. But even now we keep pushing this convention. Every time when we address the General Assembly, India keeps reiterating this call, and we ask for global support to adopt this convention, because it provides for a uniform global approach to target all forms of terrorism. So this is one of India's initiatives at the UN to counter terrorism, especially state-sponsored terror which emanates from Pakistan. Even though this initiative of India has not succeeded, we have used the 1267 Sanctions Committee as an effective platform to target Pakistan-based terrorists. For example, terror leaders like Hafiz Saeed, who's the leader of Jamaat-ud-Dawa and its sister concern, Lashkar-e-Toiba. Lashkar-e-Toiba has been a major terror outfit based out of Pakistan, which has repeatedly attacked India, carried out major attacks across India, including the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. So the head of Lashkar and Jamaat-ud-Dawa, Hafiz Saeed, was designated in 2008 as a global terrorist immediately after the Mumbai attacks. India targeted Hafiz Saeed immediately after the Mumbai attacks with the help of the other UN members, especially the members of UNSC. Hafiz Saeed was designated as a global terrorist. After that, India went after Masood Azhar, the founder of Jaish-e-Mohammed. Jaish-e-Mohammed, as you know, has carried out many attacks against India, including the parliament attacks and the various attacks on military installations that have happened in the last few years. So India tried designating Masood Azhar also as a global terrorist, but when this proposal was brought up by India, repeatedly China kept blocking India's attempts. I told you that decisions are made by consensus over here. Even if one country does not agree, the proposal will not go through. Even though India gave enough evidence to show the links between Masood Azhar and the attacks in India, China would place a technical hold. On technical grounds, it would block the proposal by citing that there wasn't enough evidence to link Jaish-e-Mohammed and Masood Azhar with the attacks in India. This was basically a deliberate Chinese attempt to block India's efforts and to shield Pakistan from global embarrassment. Because if more and more terrorists from Pakistan are designated by the UN committee, it is going to embarrass Pakistan. It will establish that Pakistan is a safe haven for all these terrorists. So repeatedly from 2009 to 2019, for 10 years, India made around 4 proposals with the help of other countries. Each proposal of India was defeated by China. It would place a technical hold and block the proposal. But finally, after the Pulwama attacks of 2019, and after tensions increased between India and Pakistan, especially after India carried out the retaliatory Balkot airstrikes, then the other permanent members of UNSC, especially France and US, UK and Russia, they brought up a proposal and pushed China to give up its bloc, and finally China agreed to support India to list Masood Azhar also as a global terrorist. It took 10 years for India to ensure that Masood Azhar was designated as a global terrorist. The delay was primarily because of China blocking India's efforts and shielding Pakistan. Only when we got the support of the other permanent members, especially when France tabled this proposal in 2019, after Pulwama attacks, there was a lot of support for India amongst many UN members, and this convinced China and pushed China to support India's proposal. So after this success, since the last few months, we are trying to designate many more Pakistan-based terrorists. Last year, in June 2022, India has proposed 5 more names to be included in the list. This includes Abdul Rahman Maki, one of the top planners and financiers of Lashkar-e-Toiba. He's the brother-in-law of Hafiz Saeed. So in the last 6 to 7 months, India has been making consistent efforts at the UN to get Abdul Rahman Maki designated by the Sanctions Committee, because he has been directly involved in planning and financing attacks in India, and he is directly linked with Lashkar, Jamaat-ud-Dawa and Hafiz Saeed. Even this proposal had been blocked by China, but recently India managed to get enough diplomatic support, and yesterday China has lifted the block, thereby leading to his designation as a global terrorist. So now there are 4 more names pending on the list. This includes Abdul Rauf Asgar, one of the key planners of the IC-814 hijacking in 1999, through which Masood Azhar was released by India. At one point, Masood Azhar was in Indian custody, but because of this hijacking incident by Pakistani terrorists and the failure of the Indian government to handle this crisis effectively, led India to negotiate with these terrorists, and we eventually released Masood Azhar, who went on to found Jaish-e-Mohammed. So his brother, Abdul Rauf Asgar, who was involved in planning this hijacking, is being targeted by India. He's still based out of Pakistan, he's still a member of Jaish-e-Mohammed and continues to plan attacks against India. So this is the other proposal which is pending, and we also have Shahid Mahmood, another Lashkar leader on this list. He's also based out of Pakistan, working actively for Lashkar-e-Toiba. There are 2 more important names India is pushing for. One is Sajid Mir, a top terrorist of Lashkar with very close links with the ISI, that is the Pakistani intelligence agency. Sajid Mir is considered as one of the top planners of the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. He was one of the handlers who was guiding the 10 terrorists in Mumbai. So India has built solid evidence against Sajid Mir, and we have proposed his name to be included in the list as well. And the last one is Talal Saeed, the son of Hafiz Saeed. The son of Hafiz Saeed, who is still involved in terror attacks against India, is also on this list proposed by India. So last year we proposed 5 names, out of which 1 individual has been designated right now as a global terrorist. So still there are 4 more names pending, and China is still blocking all of them. The reason is very simple. It is citing technical issues. It is asking for more evidence just to shield and protect Pakistan. So this is where India needs the support of other global powers as well to put pressure on China to lift this block. But however, this development is still very, very important, because this is the first time that a proposal by India has been allowed to pass through with the help of China. Because previously, when Hafiz Saeed was designated, the proposal was pushed by the United States, not by India. When Masood Azhar was designated in 2019, the proposal was pushed by France, not by India. This is the first time a proposal pushed by India has been approved with the support of China. So that in itself is a significant development. And also it's very important to note that when Hafiz Saeed, Masood Azhar and others were designated, they were all designated because of their links with Al-Qaeda, Taliban and other terror groups. They weren't designated because of the terror attacks they have carried out in India. That clear link was never recognized by the UN. Now this is the first time that Abdul Rahman Maki, he has been specifically designated for planning and executing attacks in India, that too specifically in Kashmir. The Sanctions Committee has recognized that this terrorist of Lashkar-e-Toiba was involved in planning and executing attacks in India in Jammu and Kashmir. This itself is a big victory for India as it allows for global acknowledgement of Pakistan's role in sponsoring terrorism against our country. So this is a part of our course of diplomacy against Pakistan to put diplomatic pressure and economic pressure on Pakistan. We have also used other multilateral platforms like FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, to impose an economic cost on Pakistan for failing to act against these terrorists. The designation in itself will not help us tackle terrorism, but this is definitely one victory, one step ahead. Now what Pakistan needs to do is to ensure that the sanctions that we talked about is imposed on these terrorists. They should be held liable for their actions. There should be an asset freeze, a travel ban, and an arms embargo on them. This is where Pakistan is not predictable. This is where Pakistan breaks the international law and continues to enable acts of terrorism against India. So we need to wait and watch how things will develop in the coming days. But this in itself is a big development because it helps India nail the role of Pakistan in sponsoring terrorism against the country. So that is why the topic is very, very important. Now moving on, we'll take a look at this column written by Suhasini Heather, in which she examines the geopolitical challenges in South Asia and how the South Asia region has become divided. Because generally in global geopolitics, you see that in a particular region, countries come together, they collaborate, they work with each other, they integrate their region, they reduce their barriers, the border barriers are reduced, they promote trade, promote cultural interaction. Through this regional cooperation, they promote the growth and development of all the countries in the region. So you see this happening in Europe with the European Union. The same happens with Gulf Cooperation Council in West Asia. You look at Southeast Asia, ASEAN group is doing the same. So around the world, there is a lot of support for regional cooperation, be it in North America, be it in South America, be it in Africa, in East Asia as well. So across regions, there is an element of regional cooperation where the countries concerned, they collaborate, they work with each other on many issues and they find solutions so that it benefits all the countries which are involved. But South Asia is one region which is heavily divided and there is a complete absence of regional integration. Now take for example the subject of air pollution. The writer Suhasini Heather brings up this issue. With regard to air pollution, according to the World Health Organization, some of the most polluted cities in the world are located in South Asia, in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka as well. Even though this is a pressing challenge, South Asian countries are still not collaborating, they are not working together. Because for such issues like air pollution, climate change, disasters, boundaries do not matter, right? These are transboundary challenges, transboundary issues which requires cooperation with other countries. For example, floods which happened recently in Pakistan not only affects Pakistan, affects India as well. Air pollution across the North Indian belt will affect Bangladesh, will affect Maldives, will affect Pakistan. Recently there has been a report that Maldives is facing environmental challenges because of extreme pollution in the Indian subcontinent. So when these issues are transboundary in nature, it requires a transboundary solution. It requires these countries to collaborate. According to studies, there are 6 air sheds in the Indian subcontinent, in South Asia. There are 6 pockets of different air columns, one located around Pakistan, Iran, the other around Pakistan and northwestern parts of India. There is another air shed located along the Indo-Gangetic plain right next to the Himalayas, one across central and eastern India, one across northeast India, and one around the Gujarat-Maharashtra region. These are 6 air sheds in South Asia which are extremely polluted. So to tackle with the environmental problems, especially air pollution, you need collaboration amongst all the South Asian countries to manage and maintain the air sheds present over here. You can clearly see that these air sheds are not limited to one country. There are air sheds that we share with Pakistan, with Bangladesh, with Nepal, and with other countries. And yet there is a complete absence of regional cooperation. It is this issue that the writer is specifically highlighting, and she points out how the regional organization of South Asia, that is SAARC, has failed spectacularly. SARC, or South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, is the primary regional organization for the region, for the South Asia region. It was established in 1985 at Dhaka. It is headquartered at Kathmandu in Nepal. It brings together all the South Asian countries, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal and Bhutan, of course, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Maldives. So these 8 countries are members of SARC. When this group was established in 1985, the primary objective was to achieve regional integration and economic integration. That is to improve connectivity between these countries and reduce the barriers present at the border, bring down the border controls, reduce barriers to trade and create common trade unions through trade agreements, create a customs union so that the region could integrate and come together to provide for economic growth and also to provide for people-to-people exchanges to improve cultural ties. This was the stated objective of SARC. But despite this, the SARC has largely been a failure. According to many experts, the SARC has failed to achieve anything substantial over the last 30 plus years. The only thing SARC has done is establish a food bank. There is a SARC food bank which helps the countries deal with any food insecurity issues, to provide food security to each other. There is a South Asian University in New Delhi in the field of education. There is a SARC economic framework as well, which helps the members to deal with some financial crisis, with liquidity crisis. There is a focus on disaster management within the SARC grouping. There is also a free trade agreement they have signed called SAFTA, the South Asian Free Trade Agreement. But most of these initiatives have been limited in their potential. The true potential of these initiatives have not been exploited because of constant bickering, constant tensions, conflicts between the member countries. See, within South Asia, the members like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan, of course, and Afghanistan also, they've gone through long periods of instability. Either there is political crisis or economic crisis, and there is the threat of communal polarization, radicalism, terrorism in the region. And more importantly, you have the question of India-Pakistan relations. All these issues have derailed SARC as a grouping. The internal divide, the problems of the region, and mainly the India-Pakistan tensions, they've all derailed the institution itself, because Pakistan in particular has always tried to block Indian initiatives at the SARC grouping. Even when India has reached out and promoted any new initiative, Pakistan tries to block that. For example, we proposed a satellite for the SARC countries called the SARC satellite, which could help all the countries. But Pakistan tried to derail the initiative. So what India did was India excluded Pakistan and went ahead with the project. Now it's called the South Asia satellite. Then India had proposed a motor vehicles agreement for the SARC grouping, through which border controls could be reduced and it could provide for easy movement of vehicles, especially the goods carrying trucks, to provide for greater economic exchanges. But Pakistan again blocked the initiative, which pushed India to move away from SARC and start a sub-regional initiative called BBIN that includes Bangladesh, Bhutan, India and Nepal. So this motor vehicles agreement called BBIN has been made operational by India, Nepal and Bangladesh, because Bhutan has as of now stayed out of it. Due to environmental questions, due to possibility of air pollution in Bhutan, Bhutan has quit BBIN, but still India has been able to operationalize the BBIN initiative. But as you can see, Pakistan repeatedly tries to block India's efforts, derail these initiatives, and also it constantly sponsors terrorism against India. India also steps up tensions with Pakistan whenever there are attacks, which of course is the right stand for India to take. So these constant tensions between the two neighbors has derailed the grouping itself, and this is the point the writer is making, that SARC has failed because of its internal divisions. There are a lot of tensions between India and Pakistan, and Pakistan is the troublemaker. It keeps derailing India's efforts, it keeps sponsoring terrorism in the region, which destabilizes the region, plus the other countries are also facing their own political and economic crisis. So because of these internal problems, SARC as a grouping hasn't taken off. It hasn't achieved anything substantial, unlike other groups that you see in the world. So regional and economic integration has largely failed, and hence there is no regional focus on issues that are affecting the region. You look at air pollution, you look at climate change, look at the economic impact of the Russia-Ukraine war. None of these issues are discussed and solutions are worked out within the South Asia region. Whereas other groupings are doing that. Around the world, there is a growing sentiment towards regionalization. In different parts of the world, in Central Asia, in West Asia, Southeast Asia, North America, South America, in Europe, across the world, you see a favor towards, a bias towards regional cooperation. Because countries know that if they cooperate regionally with the other countries, they will thrive together. So respective regional groupings, like let's say Mercosur, which is a grouping of South American countries, the Gulf Cooperation Council of the West Asian countries, European Union, ASEAN, all these regional groups are thriving, succeeding, and they've really brought their countries and economies together. It's benefiting all the countries. They even take up any challenges, any issues they are facing, be it the pandemic, be it climate change, a disaster, any such issue affecting the region is dealt with jointly through these regional groups. But in South Asia, the countries are losing out. Look at how Pakistan derailed the motor vehicles agreement, and it has deprived itself of the economic benefits of this economic cooperation. Right? Pakistan, if it had joined the initiative, it would have provided for regional cooperation, driving economic growth for all the countries. So this is not just the loss of Pakistan, but the loss of the entire region itself. India also, on its part, has been sidelining SAARC of late, especially from 2016, after the Uri attacks were carried out. And India held Pakistan responsible for the Uri attacks. Since then, we have adopted a strategy called SAARC minus Pakistan strategy. Essentially, we are excluding Pakistan from the region and we have neglected the SAARC grouping itself. We have prioritized other regional initiatives like BIMSTEC and BBIN. Recently, we even held the Voice of the Global South Summit just a few days back. Prime Minister Modi convened the Voice of the Global South Summit, where many poor developing countries, small countries were invited to discuss global issues, including the Russia-Ukraine war. While India can do this at other platforms, we are not doing it within our own region. Now, India is all set to host the G20 summit. We are the chair of the G20. Now, this is a great opportunity to drive regional cooperation. But as of now, we are not seeing any such regional narrative being pushed by India. While we are working with other groups, bringing many other smaller countries together, we are not putting that effort to focus more on regional cooperation because we are blindsided by Pakistan's role, Pakistan's obstructionist role. You look at the topic of counter-terrorism. It's very ironic that India-Pakistan do talk about terrorism at other platforms. At platforms like SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There is a counter-terror platform called the Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure. So there India-Pakistan discuss terror issues. At FATF, Pakistan had been grey listed because of India's efforts. But recently it was removed from the grey list and India agreed to this. India voted in favor of Pakistan to get Pakistan removed from the grey list. So at multilateral and global platforms, we are working on certain issues with Pakistan as well, but we don't talk about terrorism bilaterally. This is mainly because Pakistan is obsessed with Kashmir. It's obsessed with the Kashmir dispute. And India's position is talks and terror cannot go hand in hand. As long as there is terrorism from Pakistan, we'll not talk to Pakistan. So this rigid position of both the countries has derailed any possibility for regional cooperation. And that is why the SAARC has failed and South Asia does not see much of regional cooperation. This is the point the writer is trying to make, and hence she is suggesting that India-Pakistan should learn to de-link their bilateral issues from regional cooperation. When it comes to a regional issue, they should work together, collaborate, irrespective of what is the state of their bilateral ties. Now, India-Pakistan might have a tense relationship. They might have a dispute or a conflict going on, but they shouldn't allow their bilateral issue to affect regional cooperation. So this is the suggestion by the writer because it could help bring South Asian countries together to tackle some common issues like climate change, disaster management, the pandemic itself, issues related to education, healthcare, poverty. On all these issues, South Asian countries, if they cooperate, they will benefit each other. For this, India-Pakistan will have to learn to keep their bilateral issues away when it comes to regional cooperation. That is the underlying point. Now coming to the next topic, we have an important column that is relevant for economy. It's related to financial relations between the central government and the states. It focuses on GST, the goods and services tax. So let's see what the article is talking about. See, as you know, center-state financial relations are contained under Part 12 of the Constitution from Article 268 to the 293. This defines the nature of financial relations between center and states, and under different articles, the taxation powers are divided between the two. For example, you have Article 268, where stamp duty is mainly levied by the center but collected and distributed by the states. So the nature of collection, distribution of the taxes are also defined in the Constitution. You have Article 269 dealing with taxes on certain goods, transportation and sale of certain goods, interstate taxes, etc. And the 101st Amendment, Constitutional Amendment, introduced 269 capital A, providing for GST or a uniform indirect tax, right? That provided for one nation, one tax system as far as indirect taxes were concerned. With regard to GST as well, the taxation powers, the distribution is shared and divided between center and states. So like this, you have articles under Part 12 that clearly define the taxation powers of both the center and the states, how the proceeds of these taxes will be collected and how it will be distributed between the center and the states. Now, if you look at the constitutional provisions that we have, the current financial arrangement, the assessment of many experts is that with regard to taxation powers, there is a bias in favor of the central government. The center has more taxation powers compared to states. Center levies taxes on exports. It levies custom duties, corporation tax, income tax. All these major taxes are with the center, right? So thereby, the center has a greater share of the revenue. Whereas states, on the other hand, have been given few limited taxation powers, limited to taxing liquor, then stamp duty, land registration, etc. and other local taxes. So this limits the revenue base for the state governments, whereas our constitutional and administrative setup is such that most of the expenditure, the government expenditure on various schemes, they are largely incurred by the state governments. So this is a dichotomy that the writer is talking about. The writer says that there is a bias in our framework, in our constitutional and financial framework, where the union government is getting more revenue because of its greater taxation powers, whereas the states are deprived of revenue even though their expenditure is more. Even though the burden of expenditure is on the states, largely their revenue share is limited as the center is cornering most of the revenue for itself. So according to the writer of this column, this leads to a situation known as vertical fiscal imbalance. Essentially, from the center to state, with regard to devolution of funds from center to state, there is a vertical fiscal imbalance which is occurring. This is affecting the fiscal position of the states, thereby limiting their expenditure, pushing them into debt, pushing them to borrow more, and thus increasing the financial burden on the states. This eventually makes the states vulnerable to the influence of the center. And this threatens the very foundation of federalism as well, which is a bedrock of the Indian Constitution, one of the basic structures of the Indian Constitution. You have the Finance Commission, which is constituted under Article 280. It's a constitutional body which has the responsibility to correct this imbalance. The Finance Commission has the mandate to decide the distribution, the devolution of funds from the center to the states. The purpose of Finance Commission is to address this imbalance, this vertical fiscal imbalance which is there. But over the years, it has been noted that this imbalance has not been addressed, even though the Finance Commission has increased the devolution of funds. Almost 42% of the taxes that are collected are devolved to the states today. But even this has not fixed the imbalance because there is a greater share being given to the center itself, right? And the expenditure burden on the states has gone up. So that is why the writer suggests a few solutions. He takes VFI as a parameter, as a metric, measures this and compares the burden on the states, and he provides a way forward at the end. Now this problem has further increased after GST was introduced, right? Specifically in the GST context, the 101st Constitutional Amendment Act, right? It reformed the very face of indirect taxes in India. it merged all the different taxes that were there at the central and state level and created a one nation, one tax system. While this was revolutionary and needed for economic reforms, it has increased the burden on the states because the center has retained more powers again. There are variety of goods which are taxed, interstate transactions which are taxed at various levels, right? And the tax rates are mainly decided by the GST Council. Now, if you look at the GST Council, it has levied different degrees of taxes on various goods and commodities, on various interstate transactions. And you have primarily three types of GST, that is central GST, state GST, and the IGST. If you examine this, union and state governments are levying 50% each as central and state GST respectively, right? Other than that, you have the integrated GST for interstate transactions, and out of this 50% is going towards the final destination state. So the center is retaining its part of GST, the 50% which is being levied by the center, and the other 50% levied by the states is retained by the respective states. When it comes to interstate transactions, 50% of it is kept by the center, only 50% of it is being given to the destination state. So this again highlights the imbalance according to the writer, where the center is getting a greater share compared to the states. The individual states do not have much powers to unilaterally change the GST taxation structure, because these decisions, the tax slabs, the tax structure is decided by the GST Council, which is established through the Constitution itself. Through the 101st Amendment, the GST Council was set up, which has complete powers to decide on the taxation structure, and here the union government has given itself a veto. That's where it becomes important to understand the composition of the council, the GST Council, and how the powers are swinging towards the union. See, if you look at the GST regime, under Article 279A Clause 1, the GST Council was constituted. It is headed by the Union Finance Minister as a chairperson, also includes the Minister of State for Finance from the central government, and every state is represented by their respective finance ministers or another minister who's nominated on their behalf. So within the GST Council, the center has greater powers here. It can veto any decision, and without center's approval, changes cannot be introduced in the current framework as far as GST taxation and the tax slabs are concerned. So states' autonomy has been restricted because the GST Council has been composed in such a way that the center has got greater powers. It almost has a veto on any proposal for reforms. So this is what the writer is criticizing. The writer says if you measure VFI, vertical fiscal imbalance, which is basically 1 minus the ratio of state revenue and state expenditure. This is the essential formula to measure vertical fiscal imbalance. You take the state's revenue and expenditure, take the ratio, and you deduct this from 1. So this gives you the level of dependency of that state on the center. As the VFI increases, it means the state is more and more dependent on the center. The state is not able to meet its own expenditure through its own revenue. An ideal situation is where VFI is 0. If VFI is 0, if the ratio of state revenue to expenditure is also 1, it cancels out each other, and if VFI comes to 0, it means that states have enough revenue to meet their expenditure. That is an ideal situation to protect the autonomy of the states. But most states have a very high VFI. It's above 0.5 for most of the states. If you look at the data of the last 3 or 4 finance commissions from the last 15-20 years, you will notice that the VFI is consistently above 0.5, which means most of the states, at least 50% of the states close to, are dependent on the center or on borrowings because they're not able to meet their expenditure with their own revenue. Is that clear? According to data from 2015, the VFI has come to around 0.53, which means 47% of the states are able to finance their expenditure, while the rest are dependent on the center or they are dependent on borrowings. So this is why the writer suggests that changes have to be done. He says the burden on state governments have increased in the last 15 years because of 4 big changes which have happened. In the last 15 years, there are some big changes that have happened in the constitution, in the taxation structure, which has increased the burden on the state governments. The divisible taxes of the union government has expanded from 2 and covers all the union taxes because of GST. So there is a larger tax pool today, a larger revenue base which can be given to the states. But unfortunately, since the decisions are largely controlled by the GST Council, states are not getting greater share of revenue. The other challenge is FRBM Act, which imposes fiscal responsibility on the states, has given very strict targets with regard to fiscal deficit, and states are not able to meet that. So here as well, center is able to control the budgets of the states by imposing stiff targets under Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. The previous planning commission which was there has been shut down because previously planning commission was able to give unconstitutional grants outside of the constitutional arrangement. It could provide devolution of funds called plan grants. It could provide exclusive grants, discretionary grants to states for implementing certain planned schemes, which was part of the 5-year plan. These funds have exhausted because now there is no planning commission. Only devolution happens through the finance commission recommendations, which is not enough for the states to meet their expenditure. Upon that, GST was introduced, which has created an imbalance in the tax structure, which has given central government more share and more powers in controlling the taxation and the financial powers. So states are basically left with little autonomy to increase their revenue, whereas it makes them more and more dependent on the union government. And this is not good for federalism, especially fiscal federalism. That is why the writer is suggesting that going forward, more taxes should be assigned to the states. For example, petroleum. Right now, petroleum is entirely taxed with the union government. Writer suggests bring it under GST. Just like states levy exclusive taxes on liquor, bring it under GST and divide the taxes. He also suggests that the GST Council should be reformed through a constitutional amendment to ensure that center's veto is removed. Center should not have the sole deciding authority. It shouldn't have the authority to block the proposal of the states. His suggestion is that the GST Council should be reformed in such a way that states will take the lead role in deciding the taxation structure and the tax slabs, whereas center should only facilitate, act as a mediator and build consensus, and it should not be having the veto power where it is rejecting the proposals of the states. So these are some suggestions provided by the writer. So this helps you evaluate this topic and analyze the issue and provide a suggestion or a conclusion at the end as well. Now coming to another article from page number 9, it refers to the legacy of Subhash Chandra Bose. The next 3 articles are relatively smaller articles, so we'll go through them, but nevertheless they're very important, especially for your prelims. See, this article has been brought out because very soon, in few days, we will be marking the 126th birth anniversary of India's legendary freedom fighter, a revolutionary, that is Subhash Chandra Bose, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Right, it falls on the 23rd of January. He was born in the year 1897 on the 23rd of January. So in few days, we will be marking the 126th birth anniversary of Netaji, and in this context, it becomes relevant and important to examine his life, his contribution to India's freedom struggle, and also the controversy surrounding him. See, Subhash Chandra Bose was born to an elite family. He came from a privileged family, Bengali family. He was born in Odisha, in Cuttack. From there, he was always having access to good education. He studied abroad, he studied at Cambridge, and he even took part in the Indian Civil Services exam, which was held by the then British government. He cleared the Civil Services exam as well, but later rejected the job and came back to India as he saw this as a national duty. He couldn't serve the British government as part of the civil services because of the atrocities that the British were committing against India. He rejected a lucrative job in the civil services and came to India to lead India's freedom struggle and take part directly in the freedom activities. He would become a student leader. He was influenced by socialist ideology during his upbringing in India and abroad. He would align with the likes of Pandit Nehru initially because they shared a similar ideological motivation. They were inclined towards socialism, welfare for the poor, led by the state. So he would come back to India and emerge as a youth leader. He became the leader of the Youth Congress, the All India Youth Congress, and in 1930 he would even get elected as the mayor of Calcutta. So very soon he rose through the ranks of the Indian National Congress and eventually he was elected as the president of the Congress in 1938. He became the president as well of the Indian National Congress for a very brief period. But by then, the thinking and ideology and motivation of Subhash Chandra Bose had changed. He had seen the atrocities of the British, he had seen the slow freedom struggle of India which was not yielding results, and he developed ideological differences with the non-violent peaceful approach of Mahatma Gandhi and other leaders. This was an ideological difference. So based on this ideological divide, Subhash Chandra Bose decided to opt the revolutionary path. Right? See, here we are not judging who's right, who's wrong. Right? That's not our job. All the freedom fighters have their unique contribution to India's freedom struggle. While Mahatma Gandhi and the Congress in general were leading the peaceful non-violent path, Subhash Chandra Bose opted for a more violent revolutionary path. So this difference led Subhash Chandra Bose to step down from his post as the president, resigned from the Congress, left the Congress as well, and he would organize the All India Forward Bloc in 1939. This organization would again be inspired by socialism and slightly by left-wing authoritarianism, as Subhash Chandra Bose now believed in a more radical ideology to gain independence for India. So his activities, revolutionary activities, especially when the Second World War had started, brought him under the suspicion of the British, and they placed him under constant surveillance. He was arrested multiple times as well, jailed in Burma, that is in Myanmar. And during the war, he took a clear stand against the Allied powers. I hope you know that British India had contributed immensely to the war efforts. The Congress had agreed to send Indian soldiers, Indian supplies to support the efforts of the Allied countries against the Axis powers. Because the World War was an ideological conflict between free democratic societies and oppressive fascist states such as Nazi Germany. So the Congress had taken a call to support the war efforts of Britain, and Subhash Chandra Bose was opposed to it. He was arguing that the Congress, without consulting Indians, had agreed to help Britain because he saw an opportunity here. According to Subhash Chandra Bose, India should have aligned with the Axis powers, with the fascist states, take help from them, not to align with their ideology, but to take assistance and help from them, as the Nazis were the enemies of Britain. So this was his thinking, his ideology. So his activities during the war led him to be arrested, placed under surveillance repeatedly, and eventually he would escape from India. He would go to Afghanistan secretly, and from there lead a covert mission to Soviet Union. Then finally he would land in Nazi Germany to meet Adolf Hitler himself, to seek direct support, arms and weapons support, to liberate India from British occupation. These initial efforts gave some results, but eventually it failed because Nazi Germany wouldn't be too interested in his ideology of Azad Hind or an independent India. Right? He did organize a small group of Indian soldiers in Europe. They were fighting for Britain. They were captured by the Nazis. So Nazis would transfer these Indian soldiers to Subhash Chandra Bose, and he would raise something called the Indian Legion, one of the first resistance forces comprising of Indian soldiers to fight against Britain's occupation. This initiative failed as well, and disillusioned, he left Germany. Germans would transfer him through a submarine to Japan, Imperial Japan, which was also one of the Axis powers, one of the fascist states. While Japan was committing atrocities across Southeast Asia, Subhash Chandra Bose would get some help from Japan. He would reach Singapore, Andaman and Southeast Asia region, and here he would lay the foundation of the Indian National Army, Azad Hind Fauj. He would go on to lead an armed freedom struggle and declare independence as well at Port Blair at Andaman Nicobar Islands. That's why these islands have been renamed in tribute to Subhash Chandra Bose. Right? It's been renamed as the Swaraj, the Subhash Island, because this is where Subhash Chandra Bose and his Indian National Army, they raised the flag of Azad Hind, independent India, and they created a parallel government, a government in exile. Eventually, when imperial fascist Japanese forces invaded northeast India, right, from Burma, when they were attacking Nagaland and the border areas, INA, Indian National Army of Subhash Chandra Bose, would support Japanese invasion of India, because this was seen as a helpful development which would weaken Britain's hold over India. It was seen as a way through which India could be made independent. So Subhash Chandra Bose and the Azad Hind Fauj would back Japanese forces as well in Southeast Asia, especially along the Myanmar northeast border. Eventually, Britain defeated the Japanese forces and saved northeast India from Japanese occupation. But in Singapore, Subhash Chandra Bose would cement his position, lead this government in exile, and even establish a INA war memorial to pay tribute to the Indian soldiers who sacrificed their lives fighting for the Indian National Army. So his revolutionary struggle quickly came to an end through his unfortunate death through a plane crash. Right? His plane would crash in Taiwan in 1945, thus bringing his life to a very short and tragic end. Of course, there's a lot of conspiracy, mystery surrounding his death, disappearance, etc. But the established fact is that he lost his life during this plane crash in 1945. So this is what makes Subhash Chandra Bose a very inspiring, motivating, and even a controversial figure at the same time. So I've shared some important facts over here for your prelims. Please make a note. He started a newspaper called Swaraj. He wrote a book called The Indian Struggle, documenting India's freedom struggle between 1920 and 1942. He is also credited for coining the term Jai Hind. His ideology was mainly socialism and leftist authoritarianism. And as I mentioned, he founded a revolutionary group, armed group called Indian Legion, while he was taking support from Germany. He united few Indian soldiers who had been captured by the Nazis, who were fighting for the British Indian Army, and he had raised this force. These Indian soldiers were fighting in North Africa. They were helping Britain defend its colony against the German attacks. So these soldiers had been captured, and Hitler's Germany, Nazi Germany, would hand over these Indian soldiers to Subhash Chandra Bose. So it raised an armed unit called Indian Legion, which didn't take off much. It failed as well because Germany wouldn't back his idea of an independent India. Right? So these are some important and interesting points that you should know about Subhash Chandra Bose. Coming to the next two small articles, on page number 12, we have a development related to India-China relations with regard to the Brahmaputra. As you know, the Brahmaputra is a mighty Himalayan river, takes its birth in Tibet at the Manas Sarovar Lake. Flows down over here, it's called Yarlung Sangpo in Tibet, flows in an easterly direction, and it takes a almost 180-degree turn at the Great Bend near the Namcha Barwa ranges. The Brahmaputra takes a 180-degree turn to flow into India, that is into Arunachal Pradesh, the Siang region of Arunachal Pradesh. From here, it merges with few other tributaries in Arunachal like Lohit and others, and forms the mighty Brahmaputra that drains the Brahmaputra Valley in Assam. It is the lifeline of Northeast India for irrigation, drinking water, for navigation as well, because we have a national waterway on the Brahmaputra. It is vital for electricity, for hydropower generation, because the Himalayan mountains create tremendous hydropower potential. The same river is responsible for massive flooding in Northeast India and creates a major disaster during every monsoon. And eventually the river flows down into Bangladesh, merges with the Ganga, the Barak and the others to form the Meghna river system, which drains into Bay of Bengal. So this is the course of the Brahmaputra. So clearly China has an advantage as it is the upper riparian state. India, Bangladesh are the lower riparians as they are located downstream of the Brahmaputra. So this places us at a leverage of China, and China has planned many mega dams over the river. There are already many projects which are functional, like the Dagu, Jiuxu, Zhangmu and Jiacha projects, which you see over here, right across the border. China has erected mega dams and built these hydropower projects, which is not only powering China, but it also creates problems for India. Because India, China, we don't have a water sharing agreement, and China does not share data, water data with India. So India's fear is that China diverts the water, it's storing excess water, which is affecting the flow of this river into India. These are genuine concerns that India has brought up. It leads to constant flooding. There are seasons where the river runs dry as well, because China would have consumed the excess quantity of the water. So there has always been this uncertainty in the India-China relationship. Bangladesh also has this concern because it is subjected to the influences of both China and India. So now the new development is that China has planned a mega project. A 60,000 megawatt project has been planned, which will include a mega dam on the Yarlung Sangpo. So now India is planning to create a buffer, a counter project in the Siang region of Arunachal Pradesh. We have also proposed a mega dam of 11,000 megawatt capacity. This would be nearly 5 times the biggest dams that we have today. If you take the biggest hydropower project of India today, this proposed project would be 5 times larger than that. The idea is to build this mega dam in Arunachal Pradesh, closer to the India-China border, to create a buffer storage so that enough water can be stored during the monsoon season, and even if China diverts the flow or consumes more, it will not affect India adversely. It will help us deal with the shortage. It will also help us deal with the floods we witnessed during the monsoon. It will help us in flood management and generate electricity. So such a buffer has been planned. This is just a proposal from the National Hydropower Corporation, and the idea has been submitted to Central Electricity Authority. So India might go ahead with this project to create a buffer in the Arunachal region, so we store enough waters so that even if China were to divert the water, we will not be affected too much. Plus, it will help us manage the flood levels, thereby control disasters as well in Assam and Arunachal Pradesh. So that is the important development. But however, strategic experts, they doubt whether it will give us a strategic leverage. It may not give us any strategic advantage as such, but it will help us create a buffer to safeguard India's own interests, especially since we don't have a water sharing treaty with China. Next, the last article, a very small topic just for your prelims. India, Russia, they have launched their joint venture to produce AK-203 assault rifles at Amethi in Uttar Pradesh. The Indo-Russian Rifles Private Limited has started operating, and it has started manufacturing the advanced AK-203 assault rifles. This is considered one of the most advanced assault rifles, can be used by special forces, regular forces as well. So India has a huge requirement. India plans to produce close to 1 million of these rifles in the coming years. So through India-Russia collaboration, Russia has transferred the technology. There is transfer of technology here to locally produce these assault rifles for the Indian security forces. It will be produced for the Indian Army and the paramilitary and security forces of India. There is also a plan to export these assault rifles produced in India and increase the indigenous component in an incremental manner. Initially, the technology and even the materials would largely be sourced from Russia, but slowly India will gradually step up the indigenization. India will include more indigenous designs and raw materials to make it a completely local product of India. So this will not only fulfill the demands of the Indian security forces for the next 20-30 years, but we are also exploring the export potential, right? So this again signifies the importance of India-Russia defense relations. So on this note, I would like to bring my discussion to an end. I have provided 2 practice questions here. Examine India's diplomatic efforts at the UN to counter Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. And South Asia has failed to achieve regional integration, primarily due to the nature of India-Pakistan relations. Examine in detail how this affects regional cooperation in South Asia on vital issues. So please take these practice questions seriously and write your answers and post it on the portal, the answer writing portal, for which the link shall be given in the description box below. And don't forget, as soon as the session ends, we'll have a quiz immediately on Telegram. Take the quiz, practice the topics, and prepare thoroughly for the upcoming prelims. I hope it was a good, fruitful session. Do let me know how it went in the comments. I'll personally look at them. It really motivates us to do better and better. I hope all these new initiatives we have started is helping you in your preparation. So all we want from you is just your support by pressing that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and I'll see you tomorrow in the next edition of the Hindu Analysis. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.